My name is Lisa Ryers. I'm class of 1990 and also the co-president of the Brown Club of Greater San Francisco. About 4 years ago, in the midst of COVID, I had an idea about building an alumni-wide book club that would really enhance the Brown community that we all love and reflect the curiosity that we all experienced at Brown. And with the help of Emily Deach from the Brown Club of Washington, D.C., the president of the Washington, D.C. Club, together we were able to build a program, really a consortium of regional book clubs, as well as some affinity groups to participate in our vision. And we are just so excited that part of that vision includes the session today. And this session was brought to you by a very significant alum from the Brown Club of Boston. I'm very proud to introduce Bill Brisk, the class of 1960, who is going to talk about the program that he created for us today. And I just want to remind people that they're welcome throughout the session to go ahead and drop questions in the chat. And about a quarter till the hour, we're going to pause and open it up for your questions. So take it away, Bill.
Thank you, Lisa. I'm Bill Brisk. I'm class of 1960 and a member of the Brown Club of Boston. About 6 months ago, we decided to read Ruth Simmons' stunning autobiography, Up Home. Well before our book group read Up Home, I decided that our discussion with Ruth should be made available to the larger Brown community. I contacted Lisa Ryers, who, as she's indicated, created this consortium of Brown book clubs called One Bear, One Book throughout the United States. I told Lisa about our plans to present Ruth, and later that Professor Matt Gurtell was going to join us. He holds a chair of Africana and American Studies at Brown. And I got to know him because he presented his own book to our club, one that I heartily recommend, uh, uh, Skin Skin Folks, and it was perhaps the most interesting meeting that we've had to date, and also the longest, I think, Matt. We kept Matt for over 2.5 hours answering questions. This today, we probably won't try to exceed that. But most of today's audience has had a chance to read the book, and to them, it will be no surprise that Up Home describes an extraordinary story of a young girl, youngest of 12, born into poverty with enormous ambitions, supported by only a few teachers, her sainted mother, and a few siblings inspired by her determination. Ruth's ambition went beyond personal. As a professor and an administrator, she also enriched higher education and Brown itself. Her book also proves that the American dream endures. It also testifies to Brown's wisdom not to let tradition obscure new ambitions. You are free to take different lessons from Ruth's stories, but I am confident that we'll all agree that Ruth has proven the American dream is alive and well. Ruth, I believe that we coincided, um, my term as president of the Alumni Association and yours as president of Brown. And so every once in a while I would drop in and to see her. And I was so excited to learn about your book that I was one of your first purchasers, and that led to what we're doing this evening. Ruth, would you, if you have a couple of words, or maybe even a dozen, uh, it would be nice to hear from you and to get people to focus in on you.
Well, first of all, let me thank you. You have been very industrious these past weeks arranging all of this. I thank you and Lisa for paying such great care to set this up. And I thank Matt, of course, for being willing to be the chosen interlocutor. What can I say? Every time I have an opportunity to interact with Brown alums, it's a thrill for me. It is a beloved institution for all of you as it is for me. And every time I think about the many ways that it represents the best in higher education, I am so proud to have been associated with Brown and to be still associated with Brown. So thank you all for joining us, and I look forward to the conversation.
Very good. And Matt, you performed so well at my home with a group that didn't let you go, as I remember, until late in the evening. Uh, and it's wonderful to have you here. You, um, any first thoughts before you get into it?
I'm thrilled to be here, and I think I'll have a much easier exit tonight than I did when I was at your house. So I'm excited for the conversation and really flattered to be a part of this.
There you have it.
Well,
Okay.
let me thank Lisa and Bill then for making this happen, and say at the outset that it's an honor and a pleasure to be here with you this evening, President Simmons, and to be with the larger Brown alumni community. So it's good to see everybody on the Zoom. At the at the close of Up Home, you write, I am not the person I'm supposed to be. Rather, I am the person I dreamed of becoming. And looking back, how did you learn to dream? How did you learn that you could be the women you dreamed of becoming?
Well, it was as you might imagine a very slow process. Being born in fairly desperate circumstances in East Texas, with really no hope that my life could be different from what I was experiencing at the time. I could not have dreamed early on. It would have been foolish of me to do so, given the entrenched segregation that we operated within, and the lines of demarcation so clearly drawn for all of us, that we could not breach. And so I think it was going to school and over time meeting a variety of teachers who miraculously, though they knew the conditions of the time, managed to envision a different time. I don't know how they did it. Hope is a strange word, isn't it? But they didn't let on that they were merely dreaming. They asserted that what there were things that we could do, and that more than that, that we were important and capable, and that we could look forward to a future that was better than our past. So I always say that it was they who really envisioned this for me, and that were it not for them and that vision they had, I certainly would have become what I was born to be, and that is everybody I knew was a domestic worker or maid. I expected the same for myself, And so I would not have dared anticipate doing anything different from that. I think it was in my senior year of high school when my teacher said that I should go to college. I didn't believe it was possible, and I had explored with my mother before whether or not she thought that might be possible, and her face said everything. It said, well, of course, that is not going to be possible. But this teacher went the extra mile and convinced Dillard University to give me a scholarship. And she sent me to Dillard for a very particular reason. I was rather insufferable as a teenager, very outspoken, and she declared to me that I absolutely could not go to a university in Texas that was newly integrated because she didn't think I would survive it. And so she sent me to a place that she thought would be safe for someone as outspoken as I was at the time. And that was the place where she had gone to college. So that's how I ended up going to college. And of course, from there, my horizon greatly expanded. And I began to think of myself as being able to do something different from what had been set out for me.
There are parts of this book that are like love letters to teachers, and those are some of my favorite bits in the book. And I'm not being self-serving. I'm just
Yeah.
being,
No.
yeah. And I'm wondering, like, is there a particular kind of teacher that you really think looked out for you or had your best interests at heart? Do they all share a similar characteristic?
They don't. Keep in mind, think in terms of pre-civil rights America, and the ways in which Black professionals came to be. They could not work in white schools. They were consigned to teach um, only those of their own race. Um, and most of them were first generation students who were greatly aspiring. And so I think they arrived at a place in these schools where they thought that they had responsibility for the future of African American life in this country, because who else was going to do that if not these teachers? I won't say they were messianic, but they certainly had a very strong impulse to help young people. And so in personality, they varied greatly. I would say some were very kind of middle class oriented with all of the attributes of people who are of the bourgeoisie, let's say, in terms of their clothing, in terms of their attitudes, in terms of their style, and so forth. And some were more attracted to a simpler, let's say, a simpler way of life, and were not didn't have pretenses. So it was a great range of individuals. What I thought unified all the ones that took great pains with me is that they had this incredible caring nature, where they understood the needs to lay hands on us. And that means in an environment in which every day walking down the street, we were being called nigger. They knew that an embrace was very important to us, to be validated, to be praised, to be given a sense that we mattered somehow. That's what they all had somehow the capacity to do. And of course, it was pivotal for all of us in that era, because once we left school, we could not find it elsewhere.
You want to, when you get to college, and particularly when you get to Wellesley, things are a little different. And I remember when you came to Brown and to talk about the book, you said sympathy is fatal at one point, and you were talking about an exchange with a Wellesley French professor. Um, and it's briefed in the book, but you gave a longer version of that story at Brown. I wonder if you want to share it with the group.
Yeah, well, um, imagine having grown up in segregated circumstances and really not having any opportunities really to interact with whites. I was sent off to Wellesley for my junior year, and that was my first real immersion in, I would say, white society. And so I was feeling, I'm sure, intimidated, because how could I know whether or not my intellect and ability would measure up in a setting like Wellesley? I couldn't know that. And so I was reticent, but really wanting very much to learn and benefit from my Wellesley experience. But I had this French professor who, first of all, I'm taking French, and everybody in the class has been to France, and they have a certain level of fluency in French. Well, I'm astounded by this because I've just come from Texas, for God's sake, and I don't have the vaguest idea what's going on in the class. And as you might imagine, the class is taught in French. And so the conversation is in French, the assignments given are in French. And finally, I realized that everybody in this class is way ahead of me, and I will never be able to catch up. So I went to this professor and said to him, "I'm very sorry, but I need to drop your course. I'm lost." But he refused to sign my card to drop the course. I thought he was the most awful person in the world, and it dawned on me that he certainly didn't understand the gap that I was experiencing, and so I pressed him on this, and I said, "But what should I do? I'm completely lost because I can't get the assignments. I can't understand anything going on in the class." And he said simply, "Just work harder." Well, that day, if I had had the means to drop out of college, I would have, right then and there, because I felt that it was absolutely hopeless. But having no choice, I decided to redouble my efforts, and I just lived in the language lab, um, going constantly and doing extra work and so forth. And then sometime later, I'm sitting in the class, and suddenly it dawns on me that I am understanding what's going on. And I'm completely floored by that. The idea that there is something that one can conquer um, by digging deeper and working harder. I suppose this had not been something I had learned before, but it was an important experience for me because probably for the first time in my life at that age, I lost all fear that I had. Um, I was never again afraid to try anything. I was never again, I never again given to questioning whether or not I had the ability to be competitive with um, with excellent minds. And so that was an experience for me that completely changed my life in a way because it gave me ambition that I would not otherwise have had. It gave me a sense of what I could expect of myself, how I could push myself, and it gave me the ability to choose a profession that I wanted. And so I give this example to my students because when I say to them that that worst experience of all ended up convincing me to get a PhD in the very subject that I thought I could never learn. And so it's an example that I use a lot for students who come to me and say that they are mired in difficulty and see no way out.
Do you think of yourself now as a brave person? I mean, do you conceptualize bravery in any particular way? There are moments in which I feel like you're discovering how to be brave at a moment where there's enormous risk and peril for you in each of these locations.
I think of myself as being stubborn, actually, rather than brave. And the stubbornness is comes from the fact that the harshness of my early life gives me a perspective that so many people don't have. And so I know how bad things can be. And I know how one can become convinced that there's no way to overcome terrible circumstances. Um, and so I had a wonderful mother who who was not well educated. In fact, a very, very simple but incredibly kind person who taught us a few things that made a big difference. First, in this world in which bigotry reigned, she insisted that we should never think of ourselves as less than others, and that we should never think of ourselves as better than others. So she had a certain humanity that was striking, as I look back on it, because from the earliest age, that rang true to me. And so I became obstreperous, I think, as a young person, and stubborn, because my mother's voice was in my ear. No one is better, and I'm not better than anybody else. Um, and so I was able to persist because I believed that to be true. That didn't mean that I could do everything that I tried, but it did mean that when I failed, that it should not affect my sense of my worth as a human being.
In so many ways, writing a memoir is like looking into a mirror. And I'm wondering, when you think about what you saw, did you learn something about yourself that you hadn't understood before you set out to write Up Home?
Of course, there are so many things that crowded in upon me as I was going through this profession. And naturally, the challenges were such that there wasn't a lot of time to actually reflect about why I ended up where I was. And so literally sitting down and forcing myself to go back in time and to think about the people who influenced me, the things that went wrong, and why they didn't turn out to be the worst of all possible scenarios. I had to understand why I turned out to be the person that I am. And so I learned a lot about myself, to be sure, and again, how it all unfolded. Because I have to say that when I became president of Brown, I I was I was so busy with all the things that I was facing, as you might imagine, at the time, in the spotlight, worrying about whether or not I was doing a good enough job for Brown, and most of all, for posterity, because one always wonders, being the first, whether or not you'll make it good enough for somebody to come after you. And that there has not been another person like me to successfully lead an Ivy League university. That's troubling to me. But and something that I worried about when I was actually in that position. And so one has a lot of cares and concerns when you're in that seat, and not enough time to just take a break and reflect on what matters and so forth. So the book, and by the way, I started writing it when I was at Brown, um, uh, and and so it helped me once I started writing this book to process what was going on toward the end of my time at Brown. And then I let it go because I was too busy, and I took it up again when I got back home to Houston.
If a memoir is like a mirror for you, it's also a window for your readers, and so people get to see parts of yourself that you might not have necessarily thought to share. But it's
Yes.
the contract of the memoir that you've got to share what's right and what's true, even if it hurts a little. Did you find
Yes.
yourself pulling back when you were writing or leaving things off the page?
When I found myself pulling back, I stopped. Because at the outset, I had to answer the question of whether or not I was prepared to be fully honest in writing it. And I knew that if I would not do that, that I would never finish it. And so when it became difficult, I stopped and gave myself time to recover. But otherwise, and obviously there are some moments there where I can barely stand it, frankly. My mother's death brought so many painful memories back to me. And it's always been the worst moment of my life. And it took me a long time to grieve and to get over it. But even today, there are moments when I think about my mother, and I can't uh, control the tears. So that was very hard to do. But I would stop and take some time and then go back to it and to see if I could do it truthfully. But yes, there were moments like that, definitely in the book.
For me, I'm sure the audience will have their own lists, but for me, that moment when you're in Seoul, Korea, thinking of your brother Willard and remembering both his service in the armed forces, the comedy of errors that keeps him alive in Korea on the eve of the invasion, and his long-standing support for your family and for you and your dreams, and you find yourself in Seoul thinking of all of that and burst into tears.
Yes.
And I wonder how much you think of this book as a way to repay debts, in a way, to make it clear to people who helped you and who supported you that you didn't do this alone.
Many of the people who are dearest in that respect are gone, and so my brother is no longer alive. And I have spent so much time in my life trying to repay people for what they have done for me. And Mrs. Lilly, my drama teacher who sent me off to college, um, I retained a friendship with her and with her entire family. And when COVID came, she died, and her family called me and gave me the supreme honor of receiving her body and making sure that she was interred. Um, uh, when my brother Wilford, when I came back, I worried a lot about how I could tell him what he had meant to me in helping me get through my childhood, basically, and being a kind of surrogate parent. I couldn't think of a way to do it. So finally, I thought, well, what would please him? Then it occurred to me, well, he's a black male. What would please him? Meeting President Obama. And so I took him to meet President Obama. And before we got there, I sent a message. I called the staff and I told them I'm bringing my brother, who is a Korean War veteran, to meet the president. So when we got up to President Obama, I said, President Obama, I want you to meet my brother. And miraculously, he said, I know. He's the Korean War hero. And he reached out his hand to a staff member who presented him with his coin, and he gave it to my brother. My brother was dumbfounded. But of course, being ever selfish, I said to him, but President Obama, what about me? Expecting that he would give me a coin. And he said with utter disdain, presidents don't get this. And so that set up between me and my brother this amazing, amazing story that he held this coin and was so proud that he earned it, and I could never get it. It was the most wonderful thing in the world to be able to do for him.
Yeah, what a gift to your brother on so many levels. That's amazing.
Yes.
When you open the book, you're on stage at Harvard and you're about to get an award and being introduced. There's an extremely glossy biography that's been delivered to the audience, but in your head, all you're thinking of is that you want people to know the truth about your life and how you got here. And I feel like that's been such a consistent through line for you as president of 3 universities, as a public citizen, that truth, the difficult truth, is worth uncovering and sharing. Why is that so important to you?
Well, it's important to me because there are so many like me, on the margins of society that we so readily dismiss. And I think about the child in the, farthest reaches of the country, in rural areas, in urban areas, with no positive outlook fundamentally. And what I want people to understand is that when they prejudge people because of the state of their pocketbook or because of where they were born and how they speak and all of these things, that they're missing an opportunity conceivably to have someone who can do significant good for communities and for the country. I just want people to understand that. And so I often point to the fact that, for example, the most important thing to me about becoming president of Brown was what it says about the possibilities for everybody. And so I emphasize that that I am the girl from the poorest neighborhood in Houston, who grew up in deep segregation, isolated from everybody, who became president of Brown University. That's the story I want people to know, because I think without emphasizing that, people can easily say, oh, yes, I know Ruth, she worked at Princeton, and then, she went to Harvard and so forth. And it sounds so pat that, yeah, that's quite expected. But I want the other side of it to have an impact.
Let me see if I can shift the conversation to the subject of diversity on college campuses. When you came to Brown in the fall, there was a young woman who stood up to ask you a question towards the end, and she was expressing exhaustion. She had a white roommate, and she was tired of explaining herself and her culture to this roommate, and she just had had enough, and wanted really to know how to get through this. And you're laughing, so I assume you remember the question or have gotten it before. But do you want to share your answer, the response you gave to that young woman, and help us to think through what the point of diversity is on a college campus?
Well, I'm sure I don't remember precisely, but I know what I always say in those circumstances. And I always express no sympathy for that position. And I always insist that, you are here to reveal yourself to others. That's your purpose here. And so get busy and do that. And don't complain about the fact that people want to know about you, or that people judge you, and so forth. So I think, to me, the idea of diversity is just that. I mean, how on earth, really, how on earth could we imagine being a multicultural environment and distancing ourselves from people who are different from us? How does that work? I've never understood the concept of how that could conceivably work. And so I think I know it's hard work. I know it can be painful, but I also know what the result is if you take the easy path. I lived with that. I grew up with it. And I know how dangerous it is in a country like ours. So I always try to impress on students. And in fact, the speech that I used to give to students who came to hosting at Brown before they chose where they were going to go, I would say the following: if you are not interested in learning about other people, please don't come to Brown. If you do not want other people to ask, questions about you and about your culture, don't come to Brown. If you just want to be with people who are just like you, don't come to Brown. Go to Harvard instead. So I would always use that set of admonitions, because I wanted everybody who arrived to be ready for the lack of sympathy I was going to have for them when they complained that they didn't want to be bothered with people who were different.
Do you, do you, that's pretty close to the answer that you gave to that,
Okay.
which you asked that question. Um, and I think you went on to say that she needed to get her answers right and to polish her self-expression because she was going to be doing it for the rest of her life.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you feel positive about where higher education is headed these days? And I'm just curious, and I feel I would be remiss not to ask you.
Well, higher education is facing and will continue to face a good deal of turmoil, um, because of, some external political factors, but also some reasons having to do with um, missteps within higher education. I think that we talk to each other and we are very polished and accomplished in doing that. But I believe that we do not talk well to the public. And we have permitted an immense gap to grow between higher education and the public. And so we should not be surprised at the skepticism and, sometimes the disgust that people voice in regard to what they think goes on in universities. Because we have not worked as hard as we should to represent ourselves to the public. We love elitist behavior and nomenclature, whereas most of the country is not elite. They don't think of themselves that way. And so when we do that, we are automatically excluding people who will find that in the end to be off-putting. So I think we have a lot of work to do in higher education to win back the public. I think there are easy ways to do that. But I think we do have to work hard at it. And we have to work hard at the way we speak about what we do. Because, big words are nice for us. For the cognoscenti, it's lovely to be able to use precise terms. But sometimes when we're doing that in a general context, people take it to be offensive because we are deliberately excluding people who do not understand what we are talking about. And so I think a lot of the populism that we see today is certainly that is not all of it, but the fact that people can so easily take the opposite side when it comes to what universities are doing. That's warning enough that we need to get busy and do something different from what we're doing.
Did you think of home as a kind of example of the way that we should be writing about difficult topics? I mean, I know the writing of this book is just so beautiful and so moving and so accessible. It feels like a proof of exactly what you're describing, that even the most difficult problems can be shared in language that is at once glorious and accessible.
Well, that was not my intent, but I will say I've been very surprised by the audiences for the book because they have been, they have spanned the cultural and political spectrum. I live in Texas, which is a very, 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 very red state. But the audiences for the book have been so varied that I have to say I'm surprised by it. And by that I mean when I do book events and people come to talk to me afterwards, they often come. Well, I did one yesterday, and this is a very typical book event. People come up to me and then they start crying, and I'm trying to sort out what they're crying about, and because they can't quite get it out. But invariably, they're crying about their story, something that they recall from their life, and they want to tell me about it. And they often say that it's very similar to my story, but in fact, it has no resemblance whatsoever to my particular story. Sometimes people are very wealthy and privileged, and they're telling me this story. Sometimes people are, a young woman came up to me yesterday at this event, and she's Russian. She managed to come to this country to be educated, and she starts crying, and she tells me that that when she read the book, she began to think of her life in Russia. So I don't know. I think it is something I didn't. It's wholly unexpected. But what it does, I think, is give permission for people to tell their story. And I think that's rather lovely, frankly, that it does that. Because I'm learning a lot by hearing from so many different people the experiences they've had in their lives.
That's beautiful. I know that Lisa's holding some questions for us, and I think this is the moment at which I'm to encourage her to take over.
Well, thanks so much. This conversation is really an embarrassment of riches between you both. So thank you very much for being here. We do have several questions in the chat. I would like to take the opportunity to ask my own question, however, and that is that, yeah, moderator's privilege, right? While I was reading your book about your own childhood in Texas, I was also reading about several K through 12 schools in Texas that are entirely AI. And when I'm reading about your childhood that had so many facets that were really tactile and eye to eye, I just am wondering if you have any thoughts about the future and and how we're going to be able to marry these worlds and what we're losing.
I must say I'm quite worried. Um, and with it, I acknowledge that it may be my age that compels me to worry about this, but um, I worry about the disintegration of social fabric and the many ways in which mentors and students and students interact that round out the humanity of individuals. I know that there's so many things that we can do with our minds, and so many things that we can do abstractly and at a distance. But I don't know how you come to appreciate deeply the humanity of others with these surrogate measures. I just don't get it. And so I'm very worried that that we will need to triage in the wake of these kinds of innovations, because I sense that it's going to be very hard um, to deal with. This past fall, I must say, it's been very painful to watch what's gone on campuses in the wake of the October 7th debacle. And um, it's been painful and continues to be very painful that we don't have the ability to bring people together and to help people heal and understand, and to make plans to make positive inroads in a very difficult situation. How do you solve something like that when you are not uh, present with other people, understanding who they are, what they care about, what they're suffering as a consequence of history and so forth? How do you not, how do you, I don't know. So that's how, so you can tell I worry a lot.
Well, thank you for that. I'd like to start with our first question from the audience. I see first chronologically Eliza Knox. Would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question? Eliza? Okay. Maybe we'll circle back with Eliza. Um,
Hi,
Hi,
I'm
Eliza.
here, but I'm outside in another time zone. I'm in Australia. So if you could read the question for me, I think it would be better.
Oh,
Okay,
wow.
will
Okay.
do. You win the furthest away award, I believe. So Eliza says, I love learning more about you via the book, Amazing Story. I'd be interested to hear more about your relationship with your father over time. Did he become proud of your incredible achievements?
Um, Thank you, Eliza. And I'm very excited that you are in Australia. My granddaughter is Australian, and she's wonderful. My father and I, had a difficult time of it for much of my early life. I didn't understand him. I thought he was not the kind of person that I could look up to. Um, I did not understand his limitations, and in that sense, he was not an open person and didn't talk about his background. So I didn't know the whole story of how he had been abandoned um, uh, as a child and how difficult his life had been. And so I came to understand that in time. And I made a decision that I would give him room to be the person that he was and not place my expectations upon him. That was very liberating to me as a daughter, because I stopped wishing for a different kind of person as a father, and I came to accept who he was and his limitations. And therefore, coming back home and visiting with him was very pleasant. My children got to know him as a grandfather, and he was generous to them. And in the end, I think when he died, I was a dean at Princeton. And he was immensely proud of that, though I must say I didn't know it for a long time. But I heard about how he talked about it endlessly to other people, how he boasted about it to other people. So we had a very peaceful relationship at the end of his life, for which I'm grateful. And as I say, I did not revisit the things that I was so upset about as a young person with him. I didn't demand to know why he didn't support me going to college or any of that kind of thing. I just gave him permission to be the person that he was. And as I say, that gave me the ability to have a relationship with him.
Thank you, Eliza. Evie Fowler, would you like to unmute yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for doing this, Dr. Simmons. I wondered if you could speak more about your relationship with your Aunt Alma or how your lives both progressed. You wrote so much about how similar you were in grade school, and I found myself wondering how these similar circumstances shook out later in her life.
Um, well, as you will remember from the book, by the way, um, she's my niece. I'm her aunt.
Excuse
Um,
me, your niece.
but we were the same age. Um, and so she was, as I describe in the book, she was the so-called fair-haired one. She was lovely. tall, poised. She had everything, and that endeared her to people, especially to teachers. And so they were always making comparisons between us. She was expected to be the star, and to flourish, and so on. So I think as time went on, as I went off to college and began to grow, a space developed between us because people continued to compare us. And she was the one who was supposed to be what I was, basically. Um, Today, she worked as a paralegal for a time. She lives in Dallas. We are not as close as we were as children, at all. And I think the consequence of that is really this competition between us. I had hoped that in reading my book that she would begin to understand a bit how much I admired her as a young person, and so on. But she has said nothing to me about my book, so I don't really know how she feels about the way she is represented in the book at all. And I suppose at some point I will have the courage to broach this question with her, but I have not thus far.
Thank you, Evie, for your question. Ellen DeNoyer, are you available to unmute yourself?
Yes, hi. Thank you so much, Dr. Simmons. Similar question about your relationship with your siblings. And, having had such completely different experiences. And do you feel like you have come home to Texas? And could you come home after the experiences you've had?
Oh, absolutely. Well, first of all, for much of my life, I did not tell my family what I was doing, because I did not want that to come between us. I always wanted my siblings to see me as just another sibling. And so my way of managing that was not to say anything to them about what I was doing. And so coming back was very easy because I settled in. And what really messed that up was when I became president of Prairie View, because until then, they didn't have a sense really of what it was like to be a president. But being a president locally, all of a sudden, they got involved in the university and they got celebrated immensely for being part of the president's family. And so they enjoyed that a good deal, actually. It surprised me. But I also have felt guilt because I have had much more capacity than any of them. And so I started when I got back by doing as much as I could financially for them. And I realized that I was trying to assure their affection and their respect by doing it. But what the heck? They had very modest means and had very great limitations in their lives, owing to the fact that my much older siblings never had a chance to do anything because they had to drop out of school to work in the fields. And so I just have tried to be as generous to them as I can. When the book came out, I was very worried about how they would react to the book. But a strange thing has happened, and that is that um, they go to book events with me now. And they look forward to people asking them, "Are you so? Are you Nora? Or are you this one? Are you that one?" And so, in a strange way, the book has brought them into a circle of information that they otherwise never had. So they're just finding out now what I have done in my life in a way, and that's galvanizing a lot of activity for them, and a lot of attention that they're getting from people, and it's quite nice to see.
Thank you for your question. We have time for a couple more. My apologies if we can't get to everyone's question tonight, but just continuing on with the chat. Dr. Barbara Sunderland Manhuso has a question.
Thank you very much. And Dr. Simmons, it's so wonderful seeing you. And I'm in Houston tonight. We have a place in Portsmouth too, but we're in Houston. So I'm so excited seeing you. Your book is outstanding. And you're right, it prompts a lot of other regurgitation in ourselves as we read through yours, which I think is a mark of a well-written book. So uh, thank you very much. My question was, it was interesting to hear you say how your mother decided that you should go to Dillard, and negotiating college for a lot of people is quite a feat. And it didn't sound like your mother had had the opportunity to go to college herself. And how did she have the wisdom, the knowledge, and the resources to be able to be discerning enough to know or to decide or to consider your path in life? I was impressed with that.
Well, actually, it was not my mother who sent me to Dillard. It was my teacher, Vernell Lilly,
Ah,
sent me to Dillard. My mother actually died when I was 15, and
oh,
so didn't live to see me go to college. What I was saying was that when I asked her about going to college, that was before it became a real possibility. I was musing and asking, what did she think I'd be able to go to college one day? And she her face said everything, that she just didn't think that such a thing would be possible. Um, and so I think often of that, and the fact that her sights were very limited by the life that she lived, and by the constraints of her life, that she couldn't imagine her child being able to go to college. And I'm so immensely proud of the fact that I managed to have the life that I've had, because I really believe that I've had it because of her, and because of the person that she shaped in me through her wisdom and her generosity, and her humanity. So she would have been very happy that I was able to go to college and that I succeeded ultimately.
excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for your question. David Weinrib, would you like to unmute yourself?
Sure, thank you. I loved reading this book, and I was hoping you would. I was going to comment that to me, this book is a wonderful journey of discovery and maturation from into adulthood through education. And it shares, in my mind, some striking similarities and big differences to Tara Westover's book, Educated, which is a very different background, but is a growth story through education. I was hoping maybe you could comment on your separating from your family by your choices and the tensions you felt, as every teenager does, going into adulthood, making really different choices from your family?
Well, that was by far, thank you. That was by far the hardest thing for me. I mean, imagine being one of 12 in a very close-knit family. And secondly, never having had the opportunity to interact broadly with different people. And so leaving home to go off to college was in many ways quite devastating for me, because I was still grieving my mother's death, and I was very lonely when I went off to college, and trying to figure out how to deal with that was a big aspect of my maturing in that moment. But here's what I thought I got almost immediately, having gone off to college. I realized that this new world was a very attractive one, that learning more and more about the different people and the wider world was something that was going to be very important in my life. And I needed it to be more intentional. And so I remember coming home, and instead of spending a peaceful summer at home around my family, I got on a Greyhound bus and went to Mexico to live with a Mexican family and to learn Spanish. That's how quickly I grew into the person who wanted to know about the world and wanted to know about different people, and so on. It wasn't a rejection of my family. I didn't tell them about it. I didn't tell them what I was doing, because I thought they might think it was a rejection of my family. But I promised myself early on that I would have this dual reality. I'd be at once going out into the world, meeting different people, learning about different things, and at the same time, I would be investing time with my family. And so I focused on that. I spent a lot of time. I was never separated from my family the entire time, from the time I was 17 years old. I was always corresponding with them. I was always visiting them. I was always a part of their life, and so forth, because I felt that that was something that I was at risk of losing that, if I didn't concentrate on it as much as I concentrated on learning about the rest of the world. And so that dynamic continued all the way up through my career, and until I returned home to Texas. That's the way I managed the two.
Thank you, David, for your question. Gregory Silverthorne, would you like to unmute yourself?
Yes, I bought several copies of your book, Dr. Simmons. I have every single, my sister, two sister-in-laws, and all my nieces have your book. I never bought that many books of any book in my entire life. My question, though, sorry, is your book about your life through getting your degrees is fascinating. How have you ever considered writing a book about your time at Princeton and Smith and Brown and Prairie View?
Well, I'm hassled about that endlessly. And I'm reminded by both my publisher and everybody else that this is unfinished, because how could I possibly stop when I graduated from college? And so there's been immense frustration about that, and so on. So I do have to set to work on the follow-up. I'm torn, however, because the world has changed so much
Interesting.
that I don't know that I want to write anything autobiographical. I think I might just want to write about the situation that we're facing in the world and what I think we need to do
So
about
jump
it.
forward to now and tell what you, okay, I got you now. Okay,
Yeah,
interesting. Thank
yeah.
you.
I'm not I'm
You're torn.
chatting with I'm chatting with my publisher about what it's going to be about, but I think I feel compelled in this particular moment to respond to what's happening in the world
More
and
urgency,
what's
more
happening in
urgency.
the country, because I have the great advantage of being old and having lived through
Old and wise.
a similar time.
I
Okay.
got you.
And so I think very few people understand that history
No, no
and what it
question.
was like and what it took to come out of it. And so I'm thinking that maybe that's what I should focus on.
Whatever you do, I can't wait, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, I think that's a great question to end on. The prospect of a sequel to this book looming is great. Bill, do you have any closing comments for us since you were so generous in putting the presentation together?
Well, one, it is wonderful for me to learn things that I hadn't extracted from the book. And I think some of the questions and, of course, the answers added a lot. I want to thank everybody for showing up. And I think this has been marvelous. And just make sure that we know when the next book comes out that we want to be present at that time. But if I had one word to say about today and the discussion, it would be honesty. And I think it's been a very uh, you've been very honest and open, and I'm not surprised that Matthew has a way of inciting honesty. And I just want to thank everybody who's had anything to do with this. Lisa is a consummate expert on bringing people together in this way, and I thank you all. And of course, I thank our guest of honor. It has been a very, very personal pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been my pleasure and my honor. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Lisa, Bill. It's just been a thrill to be with you.